A documentary film crew lost at sea and shipwrecked on a mysterious island full of monsters and intrigue. A billionaire who knows more than it seems, and his bodyguards struggling to keep him alive. An evil lurking in the jungle, stalking them in a deadly game. This is Point Nemo. Point Nemo is a one-shot sci-fi survival RPG launching Tuesday, November 2nd on Kickstarter. This is the second adventure written for the 3-2-1 action RPG rule set and is loaded with cool playable characters, crazy charts, malicious monsters, and wild weapons. This full-length adventure can be played over the course of one night or broken up into individual episodes and features several fun side quests and interesting island destinations. So if you're ready to rumble in the jungle, be sure to join us for some action, November 2nd on Kickstarter.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He told me this morning he wasn't going to tell me what the episode was about, and I haven't had my coffee yet, and it's too early to solve a mystery. Stu Horvath.
I gotta have my secrets every once in a while, you know?
Every once in a while, and I'm like, man, you know I love a mystery. You know I love a challenge. But you give me much to work with, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning. Stu, what are we doing today on the show?
Well, so I know I say this a lot, it seems, but the world of role-playing games just never ceases to surprise me. So I'm going to ask you a question. What is the name of the cartoon that features a moose and a flying squirrel?
Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. Okay,
so that's like syndication. I guess that's the 80s. The funny thing about the Rocky and Bullwinkle Show is the actual name of the show is The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends.
Okay.
But that was in like the 50s, and like it has a whole bunch of different names after that. So it's like Rocky and his friends, Bullwinkle Show, Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. Like it's just like a weird thing that like they constantly change the name. I'm not even sure what it says on the DVDs when they got released a couple years back.
I think it depends on which store you buy them in, to be honest with you.
Probably. Anyway, did you know that there's a Rocky and Bullwinkle role-playing game?
Why? My answer to that is not even what, it's why.
So not only is there a Rocky and Bullwinkle RPG, but I think that most people say Rocky and Bullwinkle in that order. It's the Bullwinkle and Rocky role-playing party game is the name of the...
And again, but why?
I'm going to make that why even bigger. And it was produced by TSR in 1988.
Whoa. I should have had my coffee before we did this. So TSR 1988 was still like what? First edition, second edition starting up?
Still first edition. You were 1 year away from second edition.
Right. And that's why it's hazy to me. So like, you know, you are the very talented first edition Dungeons and Dragons. And, you know, I know they've done licensed property. I mean, they've done Conan, completely understandable, right over the plate. It's fantasy.
Yeah, makes sense.
I know they've done Indiana Jones. Again, adventure works for me, makes 100% sense. Bullwinkle and Rocky? And like, not when you're like just trying to scrape by as an RPG company, like you are the RPG company. Why?
I think that Dallas is a terrible idea for a licensed RPG, but I understand it on a business and sort of pop culture level. Like Dallas was huge in 1980. Let's make a game out of it. Let's get that license. Rocky and Bullwinkle wasn't even huge in 1988. 1988, like you have Pee-wee's Playhouse on, you've got the RoboCop cartoon on Saturday mornings, but like it's like a whole different world. Like I think Rocky and Bullwinkle was on at like 5 o'clock in the morning in the New York markets in 1988.
It's barely syndicated in 1988. Yeah. Like Rocky and Bullwinkle is the kind of thing that like when you saw like a drug dealer in a movie, he might be wearing a Bullwinkle t-shirt. Like that's the pop culture relevance of Bullwinkle in 1988.
I don't know why I know Rocky and Bullwinkle. Like it was a very popular show in the 50s and 60s. And maybe it just is that embedded in shared pop culture consciousness, you know? but like such a weird choice in 1988. And like, who did they expect to play this? Were they aiming it at kids who had no idea who Rocky and Bullwinkle were? Was it just like a passion project for like that one big Rocky and Bullwinkle fan at TSR? Like he was just like, hell, I bought the license for $50. We're going to make this game.
I can tell you exactly how the conversation went. I know how this goes. So it's Gen Con, probably 1986. A bunch of RPG creators whacked out on the goofballs and alcohol. We're probably sitting there, man, you know what? I love when I was a kid. I love the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. Man, Bullwinkle was awesome. Man, how crazy. Boris and Natasha. Oh, I loved Natasha growing up. And these are like older dudes who grew up like really at the time when Rocky and Bullwinkle were like the shit. And they probably got like wasted one night at Gen Con. We're like, oh, I wonder what the rights to that would be. And then someone sobers up and the next day was like, well, I'm curious. Let me just like, what is it? United World Syndication probably hits them up and be like, hey man, how much would it be to like get Rocky and Bullwinkle in a tabletop RPG? And they'll like $50 and a box of Bazooka Joe. And I'm sure that's exactly what they paid for the Bullwinkle syndication rights to do an RPG in 1988. But yeah, I'm guaranteeing it. Someone got wasted at Gen Con and mistakes were made.
So it is actually, it makes a little bit more sense if I tell you who really developed this game. It was Warren Spector. And Warren Spector previously had worked on developing the Toon RPG for Steve Jackson Games, written by Greg Costikyan, a game that everyone said was impossible to make a role-playing game out of cartoon characters. Warren Spector has a long history of fascination with cartoons. This Toon, he also did the couple of Mickey Mouse video games for the Nintendo Wii. He's most famous for creating Deus Ex for video games. Having Warren Spector kind of spearheading this project makes a kind of sense to me. It definitely fits in like the passion project of Warren Spector kind of vibe for me. I don't know who Spector intended to play this because it's aside of Toon, there's really nothing else in 1988 on the market that is anything like the Rocky and Bullwinkle role-playing game. It is super, super, super rules light. Like the rules are barely there.
I mean, it's Rocky and Bullwinkle. How could there be like very heavy rules?
Well, yeah, but this is where it gets really kind of like weird and like time tunnel-y. First off, it's a big box. It's like a 2-inch box. Like it's the same, depth as my like RuneQuest box. So
wait. It's not just a module?
No, this is a box set.
Oh my God.
So there's cards. Resolution is done with spinners. There's cardboard cards for the spinners and plastic arrows and stuff. There's all these big, heavy cardstock character standees, and there's hand puppets, plastic hand puppets.
Well, there's puppets?
Let's not get crazy. They're like the glove style ones where it's just like you pop it on your hand.
That's still a puppet, my friend.
Yeah, there's puppets. They serve no mechanical purpose. They're just in the box.
I mean, that's kind of fun. I'm not going to lie. And folks, I'm not hating on this by any stretch of the imagination. I am just surprised.
I know. I mean, like, surprise is the thing. It gets more surprising is what's surprisingest. So yeah, it's a huge box set. At this point in time, I don't think that there were any comparably sized box sets being produced by TSR. I think that everything was the 1-inch box or modules or, hardcovers. I don't think they had done a 2-inch box at this point. So it's literally the biggest box set they've ever done in 1988.
Sounds like Gary lost a bet, if I'm being honest.
Well, Gary's long gone at this point, so somebody else lost the bet.
Oh, Jesus. I mean, I've got so many questions, but go on.
So there's 3 different kinds of play. They're all, now this is where it's going to get a little weird. They're all basically storytelling games.
Really?
Yeah. All the mechanics are really recognizable in modern storytelling games. The first variant is it is literally just a collaborative storytelling game driven by cards. Everybody has a hand of cards that they have to incorporate into their narrative, and people can steal it back and forth, and play goes around the table, and then when everybody's down to a single card, they throw them on the table. The person with the card at the bottom of the pile wins and gets to narrate the ending. This is essentially the exact same mechanics as Once Upon a Time, which comes out 5 years later. And it's not a role-playing game, but like it's recognized as being like a really important kind of step towards the broader storytelling game movement in role-playing games. And it's right here 5 years earlier. No one knew it because it was in this game that was tied to a license that nobody cared about.
I mean, is Boris and Natasha in it?
Yeah, everybody's in it. The entire cast it has cards, villains, heroes, each segment. Like, so Dudley Do-Right's in there, Mr. Peabody's in there.
I was just gonna ask, yeah.
Yeah, like the entire shared Wasamatic universe is available for play.
You know, I grew up watching Bullwinkle. And again, I'm not hating on this game by any stretch of the imagination. It's just surprising. So that's why I was asking about Boris and Natasha, because, you know, I couldn't imagine they're just going to do it with Rocky and Bullwinkle. And to me, in my brain, like my idea brain is going, it's like, well, they could have done like a Boris and Natasha, like top secret game. That would like make sense, you know, more than like a Bullwinkle RPG. Dudley Do-Right and, you know, Mr. Peabody. You got everyone covered in there. But man, like, I can't imagine what the reception of this was like. Do you remember, like, many, many years ago, there was that PlayStation presser and the guy came out and he's like, and we've got Ridge Racer. And like, it went over like a lead fart in church. Like, I could just imagine that. It's like, wow, look, we're going to Mensa Branson. We've got Greyhawk. We've got like Dark Sun coming out in a couple of years, whatever's going on here. And we've got Rocky and Bullwinkle. And then, like, you know, everyone at Gen Con's probably like, what the shit is going on here?
Yeah, and all of it seems so improbable. The second variant sort of builds on the collaborative storytelling element and brings a competitive element into it, where each player is playing a specific character. Those characters have specific abilities. You form up into teams in which the heroes and villains. You're using the spinners to insert chance into the proceedings. The spinners are interesting because they're rigged. Everybody has individual spinners. And it's easier for the villains to get a success than it is for the heroes because the heroes are all idiots.
Wow.
Right? Like they are. Everybody's like got like a head full of pudding in these cartoons, except for the villains kind of have it together. But the thing is that the game recognizes that failure is funnier, which is also like a really modern role-playing game, theory, is that failing is the more interesting of the two options. That's where the interesting stories are, right?
Wow.
And it's right there. This one's interesting because like whoever is telling the story until they throw their card is the de facto GM. So they get to move the story around and establish things and kind of stack the deck for their team. So like the villains can like put the villains in positions where they have, advantage until they play their card, then play moves to the next player. And that's shared GMing, right? And that also is something that comes up in the next millennium and has become like a really important part of the indie, RPG community. But like in 1988, it's right here.
The most high concept things are happening in, of all places, the Rocky and Bullwinkle game.
Yeah, the third version is even a little bit more complicated. The second version is the one where it feels more like a role-playing game than a party game. The third variant brings in custom characters. You can make your own characters, but you don't have stats. You have keywords. You're defined by descriptive words and phrases, which is totally, again, like Robin Laws, kind of with Hero Quest puts that out there. That's in Over the Edge in the 90s. That's just such a modern idea, like getting rid of numbers and your collection of words. It's just mind-boggling that all of this stuff is like right here in this game that I don't think that anybody ever really played. I don't think it's a matter of like everybody was just like, holy crap, we could strip mine this game that no one ever heard of. Like, I think that literally no one ever heard of this. And it was only sort of rediscovered after all of these similar ideas came out by other people, came out naturally. Because I just don't think that this had an effect on the overall evolution of role-playing games. I think it just happened to all be in there. And it was sort of a dead end at the time because it just never took off. You can still get these box sets in pristine, unopened condition for like $20, $15.
Holy crap. I mean, did you find any kind of details on how many copies were sold back in the day? Or is this like the ET Atari game of RPGs?
I have a hard time digging up that kind of information, partly just because like I like numbers, man. I gotcha. Business, I'm not good at that. I think that it was sort of in line with their other stuff. I don't think that it was ever recalled. I think that there's just like a million of these copies just floating around unopened. New old stock sitting on the back of the game shop shelf in the back room of the comic store,
Now, granted, I think this is really the true test of your powers because as we know, folks who listen to the Vintage RPG podcast, whenever Stu speaks these words about these ancient games, somehow the prices end up going up. Now, that being said, I don't think you're going to be able to pull that off with Rocky and Bullwinkle, or Bullwinkle and Rocky. I'm going to keep calling it Rocky and Bullwinkle because that was the iteration that I grew up watching.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It feels so strange to call it Bullwinkle and Rocky.
But I think this is a bridge too far for you, man. I think this is the one. I think this is the Rubicon you cannot cross into, price hiking on the internet.
I'm going to be shocked if people actually click on this link to listen to this, because they're just going to be like, what?
I mean, if you're going to buy it, definitely buy it from our friends over at Noble Knight Games and use the discount Legends, running now through November 19th.
I would bet, and I'm going to email Jess as soon as we get off. I'm going to ask how many copies they have, because I bet it's like a roomful.
Oh, I bet there's a whole wing devoted to this. And listen, if it even goes up $1, it still works. You still win on this, Stu. I don't think it's gonna happen, man. It's Rocky and friggin' Bullwinkle in the year of whatever deity you subscribe to or don't subscribe to, 2021. Like, I haven't even thought about Rocky and Bullwinkle in easily like a decade since I saw like a movie where the drug dealer was wearing a Rocky and Bullwinkle t-shirt. Like, wow.
Yeah. I paid $25 for mine. It was sealed. Everything inside was sealed. It's all 100% brandy new. $25.
That's insane. And like, when you go to like toy shows, I used to go to toy shows all the time with our buddy Ian, and we used to go to toy shows up in Wayne, New Jersey. Did it like first Sunday of every month. I think they're still doing it now. I think it's back, but we used to go there, and like you would always see the dudes like selling off like old stock like this, where you're like, wow, my God, it's that copy of that game in like pristine shape. It looks like it's still in the shrink wrap. And they wanted like way too much money for it, because in the end of the day, something is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it.
Yeah. People want to pay a lot of money for shrink wrap. And that is sort of the case, but it's an insane kind of,
right.
It's like NFTs, man. I don't get it.
I don't get it. And I don't want to get it. However, something like this, like I could imagine going there and someone being like, look, it's in brand new shape. Like, it's perfect. And like, honest to goodness, I'm sure the copy you got was in as good a shape as it was in 1988. It was probably case fresh. They probably found like a case of them somewhere on like a cargo crate that like they didn't know existed. But like, man, just because it is doesn't mean you should.
But if you're into indie RPGs or storytelling RPGs and how they work and function and have developed, I think that this is definitely should be on your shelf. It's the same, but like a little bit different. And it has like a little bit of like an older flavor to it. I mean, obviously a much older flavor. I think it's just such an oddity because it so accurately predicts the future in like such a bonkers way.
That's unreal, man. That is unreal. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on the Bullwinkle and Rocky? I don't even know. What's the title again?
Bullwinkle and Rocky role-playing party game.
That. Do you have any final thoughts on that?
It's orange, which is kind of nice.
Is that the color of the box? It's like traffic cone orange.
Yeah, with the lettering is blue.
Very complimentary.
Yeah. I'm not even like a huge Rocky and Bullwinkle guy, but like
who is?
True. But it looks handsome on the shelf, man.
I bet it does. Well, folks, this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast, albeit a very surprising one. Stu, where can the people find you on the internet?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where I'm posting stuff about things like the Rocky and Bullwinkle. I like these morning podcast recording sessions because I feel like I can like really mess with your head.
Yeah, especially if I haven't had coffee yet. But next time I will. If you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. We got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We got a behind-the-scenes look at My RPG 321 Action and our adventures Rocket to Russia and Point Nemo right now on Kickstarter. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.